Hi, I'm Tim May. Welcome to Acoustic Music Pro. This is developing speed, accuracy, and tone for the mandolin. Thanks for joining us. We're going to talk about a lot of different ways of getting really good tone, how to relax, make things really flow nicely. So we want a lot of economy of motion in what we do. If you're relaxed, the listener will hear that, and you'll just be able to play for longer periods of time, hopefully for the rest of your life for a long time. So we'll get started here, and we'll start off with just basic stuff, and we'll work our way up. Thanks for joining us. All right, before we get too far with this, let's talk about just relaxation itself. You want to find a comfortable position for the mandolin, and you want it to be the same all the time. In other words, I don't want to hold the mandolin like this and play, or lay on the couch and practice like this, backed up like that, or whatever. I like to always have the strap on me. Some people strap just over their right shoulder. Some people put it all the way around their neck the way I do. You probably will find that the weight of the mandolin neck will probably tend to fall away from you. I tend to just support it here and try not to have my left hand supporting the neck, almost the way a violin player or a fiddle player should really be supporting the violin with a chin rest or whatever, so that their hand is not holding the instrument up. It's the same concept with mandolin. Of course, it's hard to be completely relaxed with anything when you're trying to press steel strings into a piece of wood, right? But the main thing is at least be consistent, because when we talk about right hand attacks and the angle of the pick and all that stuff, all these angles will change depending on where you're holding the mandolin. And so you've probably figured out that it's hard enough to do this as it is, and so we just want to give ourselves plenty of consistency and keep that the same all the time, okay? As far as relaxation itself, you're going to really tend to tense up. Try to keep your head straight. Try to do too much leaning over like that. And you can really, it's really one of those things you can concentrate on and relieve stress if you just think about it. The tendency is going to be that if you get tight in your right arm, you also are going to get tight in your left arm. So we just try to keep everything flowing as best we can. Again, concentrating on being relaxed at all times. You want to make sure that your instrument's set up in a position where you can play. I've actually played people's instruments who are beginners, and I couldn't play them myself, and I've been playing for over 30 years. So make sure everything is set up as well as you can get it, and there are specifications for that kind of thing. And so we'll go ahead and get started on some right hand techniques next. Let's talk about how to hold the pick. Since I'm assuming I can start you from scratch here, what I would have you do is to basically take the pick, and if you had the pointy end sticking out this way, if you have a teardrop shaped pick, you would have it at a 90-degree angle to your thumb, okay? With your first finger here supporting the pick, and basically you're just kind of cradling like that. Also, your index finger here is almost at a 90-degree. So in some ways the pick is sort of just an extension of this finger, and you're holding it at a right angle with your thumb that way. This would be the ideal way to hold it again if you're starting from scratch, because a lot of great bluegrass mandolin players play this way. Get a lot of power, a lot of drive, a lot of good clean tone. Another way that you could hold it would be basically to have your thumb a little bit, not quite as at a right angle. This is really more the way that electric guitar players play, but I have seen mandolin players play that way. Believe it or not, there was one kid who won the National Mandolin Championship who held the pick with his middle finger, which I've never seen anybody do. So there are a lot of different ways of doing this. Again, this is ideal. The first way I showed you. Now, the way I personally hold the pick, I started on guitar, and I hold the pick with my thumb and two fingers. And I have had people tell me that they have switched to this method and they've gotten a stronger upstroke by using this method. So it's just something to think about. Again, go back to this method. If it's too stiff for you, then you can start experimenting with other ways of doing it. This is what I would like for you to try first, okay? If you do have a pick that is, maybe it has 3 equal corners, it's not a teardrop shape like this, or maybe you choose to even play with what we call the shoulder of the pick here as opposed to the point. the same concept is going to hold true. It's going to, the way you hold the pick would still be the same. You just experiment with different ways of doing it. All right, I want to talk about pick extension and pick depth all at the same time here. The amount of pick that is sort of sticking out beyond your thumb is what we're going to call pick extension. And so you don't want to get the pick too far out because you're going to lose control. You're going to get too floppy with it. But you also don't want to get it too, you don't want to have too much thumb covering the pick because you don't have enough pick sticking out, and so you're not going to be able to control it as well. You're going to end up missing the string. So the catch is to get somewhere in between. Ideally, you would have about 1/4 of an inch of pick sticking out beyond your thumb. Really, again, no matter how you hold the pick, that's going to be true. Now, this is maybe not the most comfortable thing for you. Some people do play with a little bit more pick extension. Just be aware that if you do that, you have more, you're going to be a little bit more out of control. So even though in this case, maybe there's 3/4 of an inch pick sticking out, to me that's going to be way too much. It still could be that maybe you have 3/8 and that's what works for you. I do know some great players who have a lot of pick extension. Again, ideally 1/4 of an inch. Okay. The next thing is the depth that the pick goes into the string itself. So if I am picking down on the string like this, I'm talking about pick depth. I'm talking about how far it extends toward the top. All right. If you just barely touch the string, you're not going to get enough tone. If you extend the pick way too far toward the top, you're going to slow down because you've got too much of that big fat pick creating friction, and it's just going to slow you down. Again, the best probably averages would be about 1/4 of an inch. All right, maybe 3/16 below the level of the string. When you get to playing really fast, that could change. It could be that you're just sort of tickling, riding on top of the string. And in those cases, we're just trying to catch whatever we can, right? If we're playing at really high speeds. So again, the amount of extension beyond your thumb, about 1/4 of an inch average, and the amount of pick that goes beyond the string toward the top, also about 1/4 of an inch. That's just a good starting place. We're going to talk about some different right hand positions to attack the string. Neither one of these is necessarily the correct one. There are a lot of different ways of doing this again, but the first way that again, if I'm teaching you from scratch, I would get you to try would be what we call floating, and that's where your hand is not anchored anywhere. It's not touching any part of the mandolin other than your pick is hitting the string. So other than my arm being anchored at the back of the mandolin here, nothing is touching from my right arm, and I'm just going to play the string. That way, we're going to call that floating. Now, the good thing about floating is, in my opinion, it tends to relieve a lot of tension. And we talk a lot about relaxing and that kind of thing. You're going to be more relaxed this way if you can make this happen. The problem with floating is that you feel out of control, and I personally cannot float because of that reason. And so that leads us to the next one, which would be posting. And there are a couple of ways that we can post on mandolin. One is, which is what I do, is where I'm posting my pinky on the pick guard. If I did not have a pick guard, I could post it on the top. But if you do prefer to post, probably the best thing is for you to try a pick guard, because otherwise your hand can get too deep in the string, and you could also scratch the top up if that matters to you. The problem with posting, in my opinion, from my perspective, is that even though it gives you a lot of control, it can fatigue you a little bit because you're really putting a lot of effort into posting, and that energy is just going into either the top or the pick guard. Now, another way that we can post is, and this is pretty common among mandolin players, is to basically hang sort of the fleshy part of your hand here on the top of the bridge right here. You're not touching the strings because that would mute, but you're just sort of posting here. You can get a lot of control that way. The only thing you have to watch out for is what we call the pendulum effect, which we'll talk about next. So that's another way of posting, right? They look radically different, but it's the same idea because you're giving your right hand something stable to go on, and then you're out of that you're using your pick to attack the string. Okay. Another disadvantage of posting would be that it's going to be harder for you to attack the string evenly and keep your pick parallel to the bridge, which we'll talk a little bit more about. When I'm floating, I really have a lot of ability to determine what angle I hit the string at. When I'm posted, I tend to be a little stiffer, and so I've got to make some accommodation for things. Especially if I'm back here, I got to make sure I don't going to come back towards the bridge. Okay, so that's two ways of posting. So you have, I throw those into the same category. So we have floating, right hand is not touching anything other than back here. Posting, two ways of doing that. And then we'll talk next about gliding, which is sort of a combination of these. So gliding would be a combination of floating and posting. And that's where we basically are putting a finger down, or maybe a couple or three fingers, but we're not posting, we're not putting a lot of energy into pushing straight down, but we are sort of gliding, and that it's almost like a security blanket. It's not doing a whole lot, but it is serving as a depth gauge. In other words, we talked about how much depth of the pick goes into the string towards the top. It can really help you to determine how deep you are, because you do have your fingers down. You can kind of tell better than if you were floating or even posting. And so this can be a good way of, again, giving you some stability without having that rigidity of posting and really putting a lot of energy into the top. And it gives you a little bit more stability than floating. Again, you probably would be a little more, it might cause a little more fatigue than if you were floating. So all these things are things you want to weigh. You know, if you're floating and you're out of control, try posting. If you're posting and you're fatiguing too much, try floating. Try a combination of those. Okay. There are a few different, probably some variations of all of those ways of approaching it, but you just want to make sure that you don't put yourself in too rigid a position. You don't want to post right on top of the bridge again, while they make a muting sound. And as we talk about the pendulum problem next, you'll see what we're talking about. So let's talk about this pendulum situation. Our arm is really like a pendulum, so it's pivoting from here, and so it's got this sort of semicircle that we're going through here. All right, and this is a natural thing for the hand to do. And when we're playing rhythm, it's fine. What we don't want to happen is we don't want our pick to go angling back toward the bridge, which is this pendulum problem naturally creates. And why this is a problem is what we'll talk about now. Is when I play closer to the bridge, I'm going to have a brighter sound, as opposed to a mellower sound when I get toward the middle of the string. Right? So it's a brighter sound back here. What's happening is when I have this pendulum problem, I'm playing mellow here and bright here. That's sort of the extreme version of it. Right? You would actually want the opposite to be true. You want your bass strings to be a little more strident and a little more projecting, and maybe you can use the word brighter. And when you get to the treble strings, that's when you want it to be mellower and not bright. Right? So we have to work against the opposite of what we tend to do. The pendulum this way. We've got to either make it go somewhat that way, but ideally keep it basically parallel to the bridge. Okay. In other words, you're going to try to make your pick stay parallel to the bridge evenly all the way down. If anything, you would have the pick going a little bit toward the peg head at an angle that way. Again, just because you want your treble to be a little more mellow. Now you can, depending on what mood you're trying to create, then you can, get a little more sassy back here and then mellow up here. I mean, if you were playing, a nice waltz, maybe you want to be mellow up here. And if you're playing sort of a raucous, if you just want to create a different mood, then maybe you would move back here. But you're basically going to have one place that that's going to be your sweet spot, and you want to hang out there almost all the time. Just be able to change it, at will. But you don't want to be in a position where sometimes you're playing back here, sometimes you're playing up here, and then that, again, that's just another problem that kind of arises out of this pendulum situation where you're tending to not be consistent and keeping parallel to the bridge. Okay?